Can I ask you, earlier you compared Samta with, in those words, Shanti, Sukham and
Hasyam.
Ashram. What does it mean?
Hasyam means sweetness.
So this is close to the idea of happiness.
Joy.
Joy.
Sukham is sweetness, hasyam is joy.
How is this related to sacrifice?
Samatha, Shanti, Sukham, hasyam.
My understanding of samatha is calm abiding.
Yes, but not just calm abiding, but it is the inability to react to anything because you are identified with everything. So you just don't react because you are that external as well as its internal impression on you. So it's perfect equality between the external and the internal.
Equanimity is a good word.
Equanimity, but super equanimity. So Sri Aurobindo says that that's possible because the Brahman is in all things. And you become conscious of the Brahman in all things. And so whether they're hot or cold or good or bad or useful or useless doesn't matter to you. But you know that they are of those qualities, but you don't react to them as moments of those qualities. You react to them as moments of the Brahman in you and in them. So, according to Sri Aurobindo, that is a preliminary transformation, which is necessary for the supramental descent of the divine Shakti. And so he says this yoga of transformation begins when you have already achieved that. So in Savitri, he's constantly juxtaposing the absolute negation of every kind of sense perception and practical and conceptual thought, and entering into the absolute emptiness and dwelling in that. So last week we heard a section of a canto that is just a description of that state of being. And then it's followed by the descent of the divine Shakti in the instrument. And the action of the instrument is the action of the divine Shakti, and there's no sense of personality or ego or anything except being the instrument of the divine Shakti. And that's the transformed consciousness. So in this commentary on the Gita, he begins by pointing out that as in Buddhism, we are told that nirvana and samsara are the same. So in Hinduism, we're told that the Nirguna Brahman and the Saguna Brahman are the same. Now, is everyone familiar with those four ideas? I mean, I'm asking, if you don't know what Nirguna and Saguna Brahman mean, or what Nirvana and Samsara mean, then raise your hand and we will try to address the question. Nirvana is the emptiness, and samsara is the impression, the world of impressions that we take for reality. So the activity of the gunas, that is to say, tamaguna, which is inaction, rajaguna, which is fiery action, and sattva guna, which is the balance in between them, and everything is constantly moving from one of those states to the other, in us and outside of us, to bring about a state of consciousness in which the gunas don't strike us as what things really are, because we're not affected by whether they're in a state of dormancy or in a state of full-blown action or in a state of beautiful, calm equality. We know that those are just the transitory states of things. And then we are what is called in Sanskrit trigunya titya. We are liberated from the three gunas, and we are equal in ourselves and in our perception of things, because we see the essential being of things in those, all three of those stages. Similarly, past, present, and future. We understand things in terms of their potential, in terms of their actual condition, and in terms of their possibilities. And we learn to see, to experience reality in that kind of continuous grasp of the totality. Because we're not trapped by a momentary impression or an attachment to something which happened yesterday that we would like to see repeated today or avoided today, or developed into something else tomorrow. So that's another city that Sri Aurobindo speaks a lot about, which is called Trikala Drishti, seeing in the three times, so that one's consciousness is always aware of the past, the present, and the future in terms of potential, actual, and possible, at least, if not in terms of the concrete three times. And so then one's perception of things is different. And when one's perception becomes different, and one is liberated from the conventional world of sensation and perception, and one has an intuitive grasp of the whole, and in that case intuition doesn't mean some gut level guess. Intuition means the full energy of the potential of things, and also the energy to help things realize their potential, because you see that in things. That kind of intuitional grasp, has this quality of Trikala Drishti. And so while I'm at it, I'll mention the idea of Shruti again. Sri Aurobindo has commented at length on the kind of language that transmits spiritual states of consciousness. And this is known as Shruti. It's the hearing, but it's also the speaking, and it's the seeing that is simultaneous with the hearing, which is called Drishti, and it is the Smriti, which is the remembrance that that's actually how it is, because we have in us a kind of preconceptual understanding of things. Otherwise, how could we understand anything? We think about justice, for example, and we're poignantly aware of the most insignificant, incremental occurrences of injustice all the time around us. And so Plato makes the point, in a very substantial way, that we couldn't possibly have evaluated enough things in our lives to be able to make a rational judgment about that. So we have this kind of preconceptual awareness of justice. And Augustine will point out that we have the same kind of preconceptual awareness of beauty. And so when we encounter something that is just or unjust, we know that that's what it is, because there is an inherent preconceptual notion of the reality of justice, which is an ideal. But what is an ideal? It's what we remember with the smriti. We remember that actually there is this origin of things, which is just and good and beautiful. And when we hear the shruti and we see the drishti, we remember the smriti, the ideal, original nature of the thing that's being understood through the shruti. And so that's what I was saying in the beginning with philosophers like Bergson and Whitehead and Hegel and all of these great spiritual philosophers. They have entered into that state of consciousness in which they see things in terms of those absolutes. They have that development of consciousness. And then they explain rationally the world as it is from the point of view from the world of reality, process and reality, existence and essence. So from time to time there are seers who have that ability. And what they see is the same thing that the others saw. And they just speak about it a little bit differently. So Sri Aurobindo says, the Brahman, or divine, in the workings of nature, is born, as we may say, born out of the akshara, which is the infinite, the immutable self, Purusha, who stands above all the modes or qualities or workings of nature, Guna. The Brahman is one, but self-displayed in two aspects: the immutable being and the creator and originator of works in the mutable becoming. Atman and Sarva Bhutani. The Atman is the immutable being, and Sarva Bhutani are all of the elemental movements of nature, and the Brahman is both, Nirvana and Samsara. Purusha and Prakriti. And the fundamental concept of Hinduism is the concept of Purusha and Prakriti. So at each stage in the development of Hinduism for 2,000 years, there are schools of thought which elaborate this fundamental idea. So we read in our poetry class a couple of weeks ago this poem of Sri Aurobindo called The Witness and the Wheel, which is about Purusha and Prakriti. It's about the Nirguna and Saguna Brahman. It's about the union of opposites, because the immutable is always present and the mutable is always present, and the mind is drawn towards the mutable. And so in yoga philosophy, in Patanjali and Raja Yoga, the main idea is that the self, the mind, the ego, is continually drawn into the illusion that it is those changeable emotions and thoughts and lacks and gains and losses and intermediate balancings, but in fact the Purusha is deluded by that attachment to Prakriti. So it has to dissociate itself through yoga and become the Akshara Purusha, the immutable, still self. And if it can dwell in that liberation from attachments, at a higher level it realizes that the Param Purusha, which in Patanjali's yoga is what the liberated Purusha identifies with, which is the self of all, and that's liberation. But in the Bhagavad Gita, that Param Purusha descends back into the Para Prakriti and realizes that it is the will and the self in all the movements of nature. And so Purusha and Prakriti are again unified in that higher divine consciousness. And we'll hear a description of that tonight in Savitri. Perfect description of that. Sri Aurobindo is constantly giving us, constantly transmitting the Shruti with regard to Purusha and Prakriti. So that the purpose of doing the poetry course, the Sri Aurobindo poetry course, is to demonstrate that Sri Aurobindo discovered this Shruti Smriti experience in the Upanishads. And from that time on, he only had basically one thing to say. Because he heard it, he saw it, he knew it, he remembered it, and then it became his mission to transmit the Shruti in English. And so when we hear these concepts about Nirvana and Samsara and the union of Purusha and Prakriti, those are just concepts. And Hegel explains this very clearly also. We heard him explain it to us last time. I'll read a little bit of that again tonight for those of you who missed last time, because it's really fundamental. Hegelian philosophy turns around this, precisely this, the difference between the concept and the reality. And so all philosophy since Hegel has been about that. Let me